brief introduction, I would like to introduce Ms. Natalie Wolfson, Executive Vice President and Chief Solutions Officer of her firm's Strategy and Solutions Group. As an MBA of UCLA and the Anderson School and a bachelor's from UC Berkeley, she has the knowledge and experience to speak at this event. Aside from her profession, she loves watching football and spending time with her family. She is here today to explain the importance of thinking about finance as early as possible. Please welcome Ms. Natalie Wilson.
Thank you so much. So we're going to take a small break in our coding curriculum today, and we're going to talk about financial literacy, which I think is one of the most important conversations that parents can have with their kids, because the impacts of having low financial literacy are so far-reaching for your entire life. So I'm going to start with a few statistics. Yoon Jung and Jared asked me to talk briefly about the state of literacy in the U.S. and what it means for the most recent young generation, millennials. Then I'm going to take you through the big three of financial literacy and the very, very basics of those three concepts. I would love it if anyone had questions or wanted me to go deeper in any of these concepts, or wanted to talk about something slightly different. Then we're going to go into techniques that parents can use with their kids. Hopefully all of you will find them fun. I've engaged with my own children who are teens in some of these techniques, and I got to tell you, the questions they ask are amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. They get at the heart of what's going on in the U.S. and our economy. It's just absolutely astounding. I'll give a couple of examples when we go through this. Then I want to share with you just some online tools and resources that are available to all of us. If any of you teens in this room or any parents are interested in learning more, I can't even tell you how many great resources there are. And then last but certainly not least, I'll open it up for questions if you guys have any questions about any other aspect of financial services. And then I will hand it over to Wilson, who's going to talk to you about the fun and innovative part of financial services, which is AI and machine learning and how you can apply that to investments. All right. So first thing I want to just share with you is that financial literacy in the U.S. is alarmingly low. And there's a test, a simple 5-question test that anyone can take. FINRA, which is our self-regulatory body in financial services, executes this test. It's online. If you just type in 5-question FINRA financial literacy test, you can find it. And what you'll find is that 76% of millennials, which are individuals born between 1981 and 1996, cannot answer as many as 4 of these questions. And actually, if you look across all generations, less than 61% can answer these questions. And these questions, they're pretty basic. They have to do with, if you put $100 in a checking account, how much interest would you earn? Would you earn over a year at a certain rate of interest? You talk to very basic questions. The other thing, according to Standards & Poor's, who also does a lot of financial literacy research, the United States ranks 14th in literacy worldwide. And we are just behind Bhutan and Botswana. And we are, just ahead of Bhutan and Botswana, and we're behind most of the developed world. Interestingly, though, we are ahead of France. So France is slightly behind us. Don't know why. And then the other thing I would just say, and I understand from my niece Tasha that you guys do have a life skills class in high school here in Palo Alto, but in only 16.4% of the schools in the United States do they have any lessons whatsoever on personal finance. And really, kids, all of you will make huge decisions that will impact your financial life the minute you start college. And so I just thought today we could share some information about, some basic information with you. I just wanted to talk about some of the impacts. So these are some pretty troubling statistics. So 43% of student loan borrowers are not making their payments on time. So almost half have more money borrowed to go to school than they have income to service those loans. More than 70% of renters between 18 and 24, so very young professionals, they spend more than they earn every single month. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but student loans are certainly primary among them. I could go through all of these statistics, but really what you see is a generation that came into adulthood in a period of time in the United States where returns on assets were very, very low. jobs were difficult to get. There were two large market dislocations, and at the same time, the cost of housing, the cost of education, and the cost of health inflated really rapidly. So I have a lot of empathy for millennials. I think that they're an incredible generation of forward-thinking, smart, well-educated, generally speaking, ambitious people, and they just came of age at a time where it was very difficult to get off to the right start. In addition, that generation received less education on financial literacy than even the generation before. So in Generation X, because of home economics, and home economics having a financial component of it, there was much more financial literacy in the United States at that time. So those are the statistics. I just wanted to start there. I know they're kind of depressing. So now I want to move into what we all can do. We only have about 20 minutes together, and you could spend weeks on any of these topics. But if you look at the educational curriculum about financial literacy, and specifically George Washington University has a Center for Excellence in Financial Literacy, what the director says is there's a big three in everything, something that every teen should know about financial literacy. And the big three are interest compounding, inflation, and risk and diversification. If you know just the basics of these three concepts, it sets you off on the right path to have a healthy relationship with money for the rest of your life. And so I want to just, again, spend a brief minute talking about each of these. So interest compounding. Interest compounding at its very most basic form is if you give a bank $100 and that bank gives you 2% interest, it means that at the end of the first year, you'll have $102. The $2 you earned in interest and the $100 you earned on principal, which is the first amount you put in. The second year, if you keep the $102 in, you not only earn interest on your original $100, you also earn it on the $2 you earned in interest. So simply put, interest compounding is earning interest on interest. And so after 2 years, you have $104.02 in total capital in your savings account. And what's interesting about interest compounding is, by the way, 2% is the interest that you would earn on a savings account as of today at Capital One. So I wanted to use real numbers from today, from a bank that's actually pretty good. I mean, it tends to have interest rates on the higher end rather than the lower end of the range. So the interesting thing about interest compounding is it works on your assets, so your savings. It also works on your debt. So you're borrowing. And so right now at Capital One, if you were to open a credit card, and you were to buy a pair of jeans or something for $100, and use your credit card to purchase that pair of jeans for $100, you would pay 16% interest. So 60% interest means that if you don't pay off the $100, that over the course of a year, you would owe $116, and so on. And so you can see the difference between the 2% you earn in that first year on your savings and the 16% you pay in that first year on your debt is how that bank or those credit cards make money. And so when you take out debt or when you engage in savings, you have to be very cognizant of the interest you're earning or the interest you're paying. And that is interest compounding. So why we're in interest compounding, by the way, should I say anything more there? It's very important. Interest compounding, if you only know one thing about money, if you know about interest compounding, you're off to a fantastic start, because you'll make great decisions about your money. So one of my favorite tricks, mathematical tricks, one of my favorite rules of thumb in financial services is the rule of 72. How many of you know the rule of 72? All right. So the rule of 72 is a very simple math tool that you can use to understand how much time it will take to double your debt or to double your assets. So what you do is you take the rate, the interest rate, or the rate of return if we're talking about stocks, and you divide that rate by 72, or divide that rate into 72, and that gives you the number of years it's going to take to double your money. So going back to that $100 that you put in a savings account, 2%, 72 divided by 2, means it'll take you 36 years to double your money in that savings account. If you never touch that $100, it'll take you 36 years to get $200. Now conversely, if you take 16 and you divide 16 into 72, you're going to double your debt in 4.5 years. And so the rule of 72 is fantastic because if you have any average annual rate of return and you divide that rate into 72, you know how much time it'll take you to double. So Wilson's going to talk to you a little bit about stock investing. And the rule of 72 is great for average stock market returns, average bond dividends, because it'll tell you exactly how long it would take you to double your investment. So with interest compounding, we're talking a lot about the money that you have and how you can grow it. It doesn't tell you anything about what that money is worth or how much you can buy. Inflation talks about that, and that's basically the purpose of inflation. And it's incredibly important because at the end of the day, the money you have, you want to use it to buy goods and services. And so what inflation tells you is how much $1 today will buy you of a basket of goods and services versus $1 tomorrow. And the reason it's really important to understand this is you'll need to understand the money that you have growing in that savings account or the stock market returns that you're achieving. If they're not keeping up with inflation, then you're losing your purchasing power over time. That $100 that bought that pair of jeans today, maybe 10 years from now, wouldn't buy that same pair of jeans. You'd need $110 or $120 to purchase it. So right now, CPI, which is a measure of inflation most commonly used in the US, is running at about 2%. And saving accounts on average are yielding 2%. And so what does that mean for the money you earn on the $100 in your savings account? It means that it's still $100, even though you're earning the 2% per year, because that 2% is the same as inflation. And so you're protecting that purchasing power, but your savings account isn't getting you ahead of inflation, at least today, and hasn't for quite some time. And so interest compounding tells you about money and how money can grow over time, or how debt can grow over time. Inflation tells you about the money in real terms and in nominal terms. Real is net of inflation, and nominal is without inflation. So then the third big concept, and this is a concept that's really important to investing. So interest compounding and inflation are as important to budgeting and to cash flow as they are to investing. But risk is really the most important concept to understand in investing. There's no free lunch in investing. If you want to achieve a return, you're going to have to take a level of risk to achieve that return. Now, there's all sorts of ways you can attempt to mitigate risk over time, and we'll talk a little bit about the primary tool, which is diversification, in a second. But it's a fundamental fact of investing that you give $1 to a company to purchase a stock. And a stock is a tiny little ownership position in a company. And over time, you hope that company will grow, and then the stock will grow along with it. Or you hope over time that company will achieve a stream of profits, and you'll get a dividend, which is a stream of payments from that company. The combination of dividends and appreciation is your total return on that stock. Now, when you give that company, say the company stock is worth $10. If you give that company $10 and the company grows and issues dividends, maybe in a year that $10 is worth $15. It's been a really good investment, 50% return. I think we'd all love to have that kind of investment return. But it could be that the company surprises, or the economy is in crisis, or tariffs have an impact on that company. And rather than the $10 being worth $15, it can be worth $5. And so that's the risk you take when you invest in a stock. The risk you take when you invest in a bond is different. With a bond, what you're doing is you're giving that same company $10, and that $10 is a loan. It's a loan to that company. And the company, rather than getting a loan from the bank, gets a loan from you. And then the company pays you an interest rate on that loan. And that interest rate is a stream of payments to you over the life of the loan. It could be 10 years, could be 5 years, could be 15 years. But it's a stream of payments. But you don't own any rights to that company. However, you are a debt holder. Now, the risk you take with a bond is different from the risk you take from a stock. The risk you take from a bond is if the company goes out of business, then you might not get your principal back. And so the more risky the company is, the more risky the bond is. And that's why you have bond ratings and different bond categories. So this is risk. This is risk in investing, and this is risk in financial services. It's at the heart of everything we do in financial services. One thing that I want to make sure you understand about risk is when you're making an investment or when you're thinking about investing, you need to have some measure of risk, because you want to understand the risk you're taking and the return you should expect for that risk. And if you can't make yourself believe that that company is worth what you need to achieve to overcome the risk, then it's not a good investment. And there are a couple of really common measures of risk in financial services. The most common is volatility. And volatility is basically the price move of a stock over time, up and down. And it's measured by the standard deviation of those price moves in a period of time. And so you've calculated standard deviations. It's fun. It's fun. I do it every day. But what's great about volatility is it gives you a sense for the ride. It gives you a sense for the up and the down and the up and the down. It's also super easy to calculate. So it's very powerful in financial models, and we're not going to go there. But the issue with volatility is it's not very helpful in measuring human behavior. It's incredibly helpful in calculating asset prices, but not helpful at all as it relates to how humans actually behave when stock markets are very, very rocky. And for anyone who wants to invest, it's really important, the most important thing for you to understand is your tolerance for risk. And Kahneman and Tversky, who are two economists, did a lot of research on this. And what they found in their prospect theory was that humans are much more loss averse than they are risk celebrating. And so we as humans are actually about twice as likely to feel, or we feel twice as bad when we experience a loss as we do joy when we experience gain. And the less money we have, the higher that ratio is. It makes a lot of sense, right? If you have less money to lose, when you lose that money, it's more painful to you than the prospect of a gain. And so, in my view, the most helpful measure of risk in financial services is your max loss tolerance. And in financial services, they call it max drawdown. And what it is it's the percentage loss from peak to trough before a new peak is reached. And so I love round numbers. Let's just say you invested $1,000 in the stock market at the exact wrong moment. And over the course of the next 6 months, the stock market went down by 40%, which did happen in 2008, almost 50 actually. So by 40%. Then you've lost $400. That's the max loss from the 1,000, 40% to 600. And then it took almost 18 months, I think it was 18 months to get back to the original high. So you have to know if you can withstand that loss. You're going to hear a little bit about Warren Buffett from Wilson in a few minutes, but what Warren Buffett says is you need to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. And it's very hard to put money in a market that's been falling so quickly. And so I just want to talk a little bit about, max drawdown, and I want to talk a little bit about standard deviation, because it's at the heart of a lot of innovation right now in financial services, and a lot of really great work that's helping investors stay invested in the market. So I want to talk also a moment about diversification. So diversification is the oldest technique that investors use to mitigate risk. And what this basically says is combine different types of investments that have low correlations or inverse correlations to one another, so that over the course of long periods of time, when, say, bonds go down, stocks go up, etc. And you have to do this in an intelligent way, because if you're over-diversified, you can compress returns. And so there's a lot of math and a lot of research going into diversification right now. But that is the most classic technique. So we talked about this for just about 10 minutes, and now you are financially literate enough, all of you, to pass the test. Because every question on the FINRA test is related to the big three of financial literacy. The first helps you understand and have a strong relationship with money, debt, and investing. The second helps you understand that you got to keep up with inflation to maintain your purchasing power. And the third is just the basics of investing. All right, so here are some fun games that you can all play, or some fun projects that you can do as families. So all of you teens out there, keep me honest. Tell me if you think these are fun or not. And all your parents out there, tell me if you think these are fun or not. So I love threes. So 3 categories of providing a strong foundation. The first is budgeting. And budgeting is really important. And it's actually a very easy element of financial literacy to get wrong right off the bat. Because you come out of college and all of a sudden you're dealing with things that you've never seen before. Many people have never seen a paycheck. Many people have never seen taxes or tax rates. Many people are moving to new cities and they have no idea what the rent is like. So a fun technique, a fun game, and I've actually played this with both of my kids who are 12, so they're rising 7th graders, a little younger than this group, is basically to just ask them, what would you like to do when you grow up, and where would you like to live? Just pick a place or two and a job or two. So my daughter wanted to either be a doctor or a teacher, and she wanted to live anywhere there was a beach. So we picked Florida and California. And my son wanted to be an archaeologist or something in business. And so we just picked consultant because it was easy to explain. And through the course of this exercise, we found online, you can go to the Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you can find what entry-level employees on average receive in any profession in the US. You can then look all over the internet and you can find out what the wage inflation or deflation is for the location you pick. We looked for what the average rent was, how much utilities cost, basically built a monthly budget. And what was really interesting about this particular exercise is, first of all, my son was absolutely fascinated with the paycheck, and he couldn't understand for the life of him why he was being taxed twice. And that's the way he looked at it. He's like, wait, I'm paying tax for Social Security, and I'm paying tax for tax. And so we had a great conversation about taxes and how you have to be aware of taxes. He also couldn't understand why California was taxing him and the US was taxing him. So it was really interesting. Now my daughter, on the other hand, was very interested in healthcare. She couldn't, the paycheck was amazing, just an amazing teaching tool, and she couldn't understand why healthcare cost so much. Both of them chose to live in different places. So my son wanted to live in Hoboken outside of New York, wanted to start his career there, but the rent was too high. And my daughter wanted to live in California, but decided Florida was just fine because the rent was too high. And she'd have more money to spend on the types of things she wanted to spend. So anyway, it's a really good game. It only took 2.5 hours. It really did not take long at all. So for borrowing and spending, borrowing and saving, I should say, there's some really great things you can do here. One is go buy something, and you buy something, virtual something. So you can buy something with a credit card, and what I had my daughter and son do is peruse magazines. And find something that they've always wanted. And then we research credit cards, we research interest rates, penalty payments, minimums, things like that. Many of you are actually closer to driving age. So it's fun to virtually buy a car and to take a look at auto loans and all of the different components of auto loans, as well as auto insurance and things like that. So it's a really helpful tool if you want to talk about borrowing and saving. As it relates to saving, I think it's always interesting to understand how banks make money. And it's actually, I think, interesting because it helps you understand both sides, the borrowing side and the saving side. And so just go to a bank, go to Capital One, go to Wells Fargo, go to Chase, go to an online bank, no matter who, and research how much money you can make on a savings account, how much money they charge for credit cards, and how much money they charge for loans. And the difference between what they pay you for the money you deposit and what you earn, and what you need to pay for money you borrow, is how the banks make money. It's called spread, and it's just a really powerful and important part of financial services and something interesting to understand. And that one actually only takes an hour or so. So investing actually is the one that takes the most time. And the reason it takes the most time is because there's so many different types of investments available to you. And there's so many different account types and vehicles that you can choose from. You could just start with stock, and you could play a stock game. You could start with stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. But whatever you start with, begin with really understanding the different instruments. So in financial services, an instrument is the name we give an investing vehicle. So a mutual fund's an instrument, a bond's an instrument. But understand what each of these instruments is intending to do and why you might want to invest in it. So as an example, we've talked a little bit about stocks and bonds. So mutual funds, of which ETFs, exchange traded funds, are a type. They just happen to be exchanged they happen to be traded on the exchange and have liquidity every day. They're a vehicle that was expressly built so that small investors can diversify. So that rather than putting your $10 in one stock, you can put your $10 in 100 stocks, or 50 stocks, or 30 stocks. And so going through and explaining the different vehicles, I find to be very interesting. I haven't done this with my kids yet, because I think they're a little too young for it, honestly. But hopefully I'll do it soon. The other thing to spend a lot of time on in investing is fees. How much investments cost. Because, I've really enjoyed my career in financial services, and I spend every day trying to do the right thing for investors. But as an industry, we do a horrible job of helping people understand exactly what they're paying for things. And there's lots of hidden costs. There's lots of hidden penalties. There's lots of costs embedded in products that are hard to understand. And so just taking a very, very simple vehicle like a mutual fund or a stock and understanding all the costs is important. And costs tend to fall into three main categories. They tend to be penalties, account fees, and then product fees. All right. So the other thing I just would say is understanding the risk-return profiles of the vehicles is pretty easy to do. You can do it with Yahoo Finance. You can do it with Morningstar and many sites. But what the return profile is over the last 90 years, say, and then what the risk profile is. What was the maximum drawdown? How long did it last? So you get a sense for the risk of that particular vehicle. Just so you know, for the S&P 500, it was 10% average annual returns, and the maximum drawdown, I believe, was 60% in the Great Depression. So here are the resources that you all have to help you as you have this conversation in your families about financial literacy, or with your friends, or at Wisenspace. I don't know, maybe we'll take this on. So I just want to say there is a tremendous amount of interactive resources online, and they are incredible. So Justin let you all know that I love football, and so does my son. And we have played financial football, and it's awesome. What they do is they put the Madden interface on top of an algorithm that asks you questions about financial services. And the better you get, the harder the questions get. And what they do is they say, all right, you're on offense, would you like to do this play? Then they ask you the financial services question, and if you get it right, the play goes for long yards, and if you get it wrong, then it goes for a loss. And you pick a team, so he's always the Jets, and I'm always the 49ers. It's really fun. So there's many, many tools like this. The online personal finance game, group of Gen I, save people. They save groups of people from horrible financial positions. And so it's a kind of a choose-your-own-adventure sort of game, but with financial services. Also, there's a YouTube channel. There's many YouTube channels, but Fidelity happens to have a really great one, where they take you through like short videos, 1 minute, on the basic concepts of finance. It's a great way to get started. And then there's obviously the stock market game. As an adult, you can sign up and you can play the stock market game with your kids. And it's really fun to invest $1 million and see how it does over a year. And then there's also detailed tools and curriculum. I'm trying to sponsor my local high school where I grew up, because I think it's so important to have financial literacy in the high schools. But if you're interested in looking at what a financial literacy curriculum looks like, you can go to tools like the Council for Economic Education. And they not only lay out the curriculum, they lay out benchmarks for what your child should know by the time they're in 5th grade, they're in 8th grade, and they're in 12th grade. In addition to that, many Visa, Mint, which is Northwestern Mutual, TD Ameritrade, they have tons of calculators, tools, quick games, educational materials that you can use. I'm a big fan of NerdWallet. They just so easy to understand, so easy to read. And then if you want to know more about pay and careers, the Big Payoff is a great place to go because it tells you the difference in earning potential depending on the level of degree you get. So how much you're likely to earn on average if you have an undergraduate degree, how that goes up when you have a graduate degree, and how that goes up again when you have a doctorate degree. So it's just an interesting thing to look through. So that's it. So we have 20 minutes together. I don't know if anyone has any questions or if you'd like for Wilson to start.
Actually, we have like 10 minutes question time. So, is this okay?
When you play that game with your kids and they talk about buying something, did you actually buy it for them?
So, did you all hear that? We did not, because what they wanted was too expensive. So my son wanted a car, and he's 12. We did not buy it for him. And forgetting what Autumn wanted, but it's something really expensive too. But if they had picked something like a pair of jeans, I would have purchased it and I would have put them on a payment plan. I would have been the bank. So I would have let them buy it on credit. But I wanted it to be something they were interested in, right? Like, that's what's fun about it.
You mentioned that there's that you can check how you just mentioned it, and I completely forgot what it was, but does the website show you the kinds of degrees that you earn? Like, for example, if you're getting a BFA versus a BA versus any other kind of undergraduate, and then how that differs master's and PhD.
So the Big Payoff tells you the difference between professional degrees and non-professional degrees. But it doesn't go, so professional degrees are degrees like law or business. It'll also tell you the MD versus the PhD. So medical doctor versus doctor of sciences or letters. It does not go into each career and say, hey, if you have an undergraduate in business from Wharton, how much do you make versus if you have a graduate degree in business. If you'd like to understand salaries at that level of detail, where I would go is I would go to the Department of Labor's statistics. And they're pretty granular. And they'll tell you more about specific types of jobs. Also, many colleges and universities will tell you what their average graduate in certain degrees make. And so going to those colleges and universities is another really good source. Yes?
What do you think of the U.S. inflation target?
The 3%?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's a target, right? It's what the Fed thinks is a healthy enough economy without the economy getting too overheated. My concern about the 3% target is it feels like the Fed has been so successful in keeping its inflation so incredibly low that so many people, and that interest rates and inflation are related, that people have grown really dependent on these low interest rates. And so when they try to heat up inflation a little bit, which would be good for a lot of reasons, it really turns up the dial on the American consumer, and I'm not a big fan of that. So I think the target is a target, and it's helpful to have a target because certainty in markets is always a good thing, but I just don't know that we're going to get there for a long time. Yeah?
Also, do you believe that banks should lower their interest for when you borrow from the bank? That way, in case there's a recession, they can lower the bank's encourage more spending.
So say it one more time. I just want to make sure I'm answering your question.
Do you believe banks should have their borrowing interest rate be higher so that in case of a recession, they can lower it?
So did you all hear that, by the way? So do I believe that banks should banks should lower their interest rates? So in a recession, they can raise it, right? That's what you said.
No.
Raise their interest rates so that in a recession they can lower it. And that's an easier question to answer. So banks have to compete. They have to compete for deposits, and they also have to compete for lending. And so banks keep a very close eye on each other in terms of the rates that other banks are charging, because they don't want their loans to go to a different bank. And so what's happening right now is banks loan rates are set within a band where banks can attract those loans and where banks can attract deposits. And the interest rate on deposits right now are incredibly low because people are very nervous about the economy and they're giving money to banks and they're giving money to treasury bonds. And so as long as that happens, as long as people are nervous and they're putting money in those institutions in that way, expect those rates to stay low. And then as long as folks need the borrowing and banks have good cash flows coming in, good flows coming in, expect those rates to stay high. Because the banks are going to try and maximize their spread. Now, that's what's happening. I would actually really love it if banks could lower rates on borrowing because I think then more people could buy homes and the inflation in home prices has been really incredible. Also, the spread seems pretty wide right now to me, personally. But as long as the banks are trying to compete and their consumers want benefits and services like ATMs everywhere, free ATMs, rewards programs, things that cost money, I think you'll continue to see these spreads pretty wide. But it's a great question.
I think we can have one more question.
Yeah, who would benefit most from improved financial awareness among the population? Would that be a mandate to the government or to private institutions? Where do we see that?
Oh, I think consumers benefit the most. So if we're all more educated about the fees we pay, the cost of borrowing, then we won't be giving institutions money who have hidden fees, who charge too much in interest, who aren't paying enough on our balances. So I really think financial literacy is absolutely to the benefit of the consumer. And there's no reason we shouldn't be able to achieve that. Just the amount of knowledge you can get online now used to be so completely obscured, and now we all have free and open access to it. So absolutely, in my opinion, it's the consumer who benefits, and it's the financial institutions who are going to have to get a whole bunch more competitive and a whole bunch more lean if that happens. And I think that would be a good thing myself.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go to the next, I think, how about we have like 5 minutes break? We'll take to use the restroom and have some more drinks. Yeah. And we have people here.
Rodi.